Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks so much for coming. I feel like since our honored guest is a highly decorated military leader that we need to start on time. So we are going to get started. So good afternoon. Welcome to WashU Enterprise Mobility Leadership Symposium featuring Admiral Sandy Winnefeld. And really glad that you're all here and grateful that you decided to spend this afternoon with us. Appreciate you taking time out of your busy lives. For those of you who have not met me, my name is Greg Zipfel. I'm the chair of neurosurgery here at WashU. And it's really a privilege to have you all here, a number of colleagues, leaders, friends, focused on something that I really think not only shapes our department or our institution, but our community. We're going to be focusing in on leadership today. So thanks for joining us. I first want to give special thanks to Dr. Dacey, who, for those of you who don't know, if you don't know, is the former chair of neurosurgery here at WashU, 30 years leading this department until 7 years ago, and a really longtime colleague, mentor, and friend. And really the inspiration and the vision for this leadership symposium is from Ralph. So thank you so much for organizing all this, Ralph. I think the vision comes from Ralph's vision and commitment to developing strong leaders that have left a lasting impression upon our department, our institution, and our community at large. In addition to thanking Ralph, I want to recognize and thank many of the Dacey family members, several of whom flew in for this event. Thank you for taking the time and being part of this special event for us and the institution. And I also want to, I'm not going to name everybody, but I do want to recognize that a number of very esteemed academic neurosurgeons who have flown in from all parts of the country, many of whom are very, very close to Ralph, came in for this event, and so it's great for you all to be part of this as well. Of course, I want to, it's a great honor, tremendous honor that Admiral Sandy Winnefeld is going to be guiding our leadership symposium today. His experience at the highest levels of military, where clarity, integrity, decisiveness really matters, I think is going to bring a perspective that we all can learn from today. So I'm deeply appreciative that you're here today and willingness to share your insights. I'm going to let Dr. Dacey do a formal introduction of Admiral Winnefeld here in just a bit. And I also want to really thank the Taylor family, two of which are here today, Andy and Barbara, somewhere. Andy, and Barbara's somewhere as well. Barbara, thank you so much. It's just, I just want a heartfelt thanks. It's been a real pleasure becoming friends to the department and to me personally over the last several years. This symposium would really not be possible with the extraordinary generosity and partnership that you all and your family have had with us over the last few years. The impact you've had on our department is profound. This is for people who don't know, this is our second year of being the Taylor Family Department of Neurosurgery, which was established last year. Incredible generosity that really has transformed our work and that of WashU. So thank you very much to the Taylor family. Your gift has allowed us to strengthen our ability to retain and recruit the absolute best faculty possible, to expand multiple initiatives throughout our department and our school, to invest in research, invest in education, and you're going to meet two of our best residents later today, and continue to build on a department that's not only setting the standard nationally, but globally here in St. Louis. So really appreciate all you've done for us. The tangible impact is one thing, but I just want to point out the character that I've seen as I've gotten to know you, Andy and Barbara, and your extended family. That character is something that I think is tremendous that we've learned from, and it's really one of the great honors of my professional life to have gotten to know the two of you, witness the commitment that you have to excellence and the commitment you have to your own people and to the St. Louis community. So again, thank you very much. I also want to extend a thank you to the Enterprise Mobility family. There's a number of leaders here as well, and I think the partnership today in this leadership symposium is an evidence of sharing shared values of leadership, service, and long-term vision, and I think that we're going to hear from you all and hopefully you hear from us and we can both learn together, led by Admiral Winnefeld. So, as we move forward with the program, I encourage all of us to reflect on the type of leaders we aspire to be in our operating rooms, in our labs, in our classrooms, in our industries, and most importantly, I think, in our communities. Leadership is not defined by title alone. It is defined by character, courage, humility, and willingness to serve something larger than ourselves. So Ralph, thank you very much for your vision. Admiral Winnefeld, thank you for leading us on this symposium today. And I want to, again, especially thank the Taylor family for making this day possible and continue to elevate our department in so many extraordinary ways. So with that, let's begin. Thank you. I think, Mr. Taylor, you're going to have a few words.
Here we go. Okay, terrific. Thank you. I'm not very tech savvy. Anyway, thanks everybody for being here. I think you'll find this really fascinating, as I've always found it fascinating since I met Sandy Winnefeld 26 years ago, and his wife Mary. And in fact, we went out and visited Sandy's ship. At the time, he was on active duty as a lieutenant admiral. Is that right? Yeah, 3-star. Okay. And flew on board, caught a wire, spent the night, got catapulted off the next day. It's quite an experience. So anyway, Sandy, thank you for that. I've thanked you that many times. But the reason why I'm up here talking is my father was a Navy veteran. He was a greatest generation guy. He flew an F-6F Grumman Hellcat off the carrier Enterprise. Why do you think we're named Enterprise? Enterprise and Essex. And truly a greatest generation guy, a hero. And my father was flunking out of a certain college just before Pearl Harbor attack. And that school was very close, where he was not doing well. And he proceeded after Pearl Harbor to wanted to fly. He'd never had flown. So he went in to sign up with the Army Air Corps. And they turned him down because he had hay fever. Is there an allergist in this room who could explain why they turned down my father? Anyway, a friend of his said, "Don't worry, Jack, the Navy has airplanes." So my father went down to the Navy, and the Navy took him in a heartbeat. I think it was more dangerous to fly in the Navy than it was in the Army Air Force. Anyway, so he was called up, ended up serving on the USS Essex and the USS Enterprise. And he would say, if he were still alive, he would tell you that the Navy changed his life. And it's all about the leadership stuff Sandy's going to talk about here. And Barbara can attest, because she knew my father well, that it was truly a life-changing event for my father. And you can see we have 92,000 employees today, 2 million cars, and some other stuff we do. Anyway, thank you, Barbara, for putting up with my family and putting up with me. It's been a lot of work. And anyway, it's onward. We're still working hard, having a great time. My daughter now runs the company, sort of. I'm there too, and it's been a great story. So I think that's all I have to tell you. So I am now going to introduce
Ralph.
Dr. Ralph Dacey, our hero.
So Dr. Dacey has pre-recorded his introduction.
Thanks, Greg. It's great to see all of you today, and I'm glad that you could come. I too would like to acknowledge Mr. Andy Taylor. For many years, he and his father, Jack, and now his daughter, Chrissy, have sustained the whole community with their generosity and enthusiasm. He has been especially gracious with his support of Washington University and our department. Andy, thank you so much. I also want to recognize Barbara Taylor. Over the past several years, I have witnessed her incredible support for her husband, Andy. Barbara, you are the best. Allow me to introduce Admiral James Sandy Winnefeld, who will guide us this afternoon as we discuss leadership. The Admiral came from a Navy family. His father was an admiral. His son is a captain in the United States Marine Corps. He has served our country for 37 years in the Navy, first as a Top Gun instructor and fighter pilot, then as the commander of the USS Enterprise on September 11, 2001. And finally, as a 4-star admiral and vice chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. He continues now to serve us in various important executive positions in the private sector. Two people for whom I have the greatest respect have told me the same thing. My friend Admiral Vern Clark, the former Chief of Naval Operations, told me, "Sandy is one of the very smartest people that I have ever worked with." Andy Taylor, another friend, told me virtually the same thing. Here are the Admiral's thoughts about what leadership is.
Ralph, as you know, an important element of leadership is preparing the next generation. Whether it's in the military, medicine, or business, it's always about developing people, building trust, and showing up when it matters the most. I'm proud to be part of this conversation today, and I hope everyone here takes something meaningful back to their own teams.
So leadership is all about teaching the younger professionals who work with us. And with that in mind, let me say that today's session is focused on the younger people. Our residents, younger faculty members in the medical school, the nurses and therapists with whom we work, and the young leaders here representing enterprise mobility. This focus is also on the very youngest of the people here today. My granddaughter, Daisy Cunningham, and her brother, Patrick Cunningham. She is visiting us from Connecticut today with her mother, Lizzie. Sandy, she is wearing a navy blue headband in your honor. Daisy, I want to tell you something very important. Pay great attention to Admiral Winnefeld. I think you will become a leader, just like your mother and the wonderful young women and men who are with us today. I have pre-recorded my brief remarks today so that we can remain precisely on time and listen to the Admiral. I have asked a friend of mine to help me welcome the Admiral. This person is an earlier version of me who was also very interested in leadership. This guy doesn't quite look like me, and he talks funny, but I think that you will get the picture, and it may make you laugh.
Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming my friend, Admiral Winnefeld. Sir, it is an honor and a great pleasure to welcome you. Thank you for being here.
Seriously, Sandy, that video was clearly aspirational on my part. However, you are great to come and spend time with us, teaching us about leadership today. Teaching leadership to the people in this room is very important because they have critical responsibilities. One of the responsibilities at Enterprise is to help people by facilitating safe and convenient travel. The responsibility of most of the other people in the room today are to help people like me stand up and walk again and get better in so many other ways. Thank you very much, sir. You've done some extremely important work in your life, and we appreciate your hard work here today.
High five. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
Well, good afternoon. Finally, it's my turn. Thank you, Andy. Thank you, Ralph, for setting this up. It's a real privilege, frankly, for me to be here with you today. I'm blown away by the attendance and by the skill that's in this room. And thank you, Megan, wherever you are, for everything you did to support this coming together. I also want to thank, in particular, Ralph and the neurosurgery department here for the very kind donation that you have made to Mary's and my nonprofit, SAFE Project. Thank you very much for that. And to Andy and Barbara and the Taylor family for your enduring support for that. It's made all the difference in the world, and we are trying to save lives just like you are. So thank you for that. I also notice that there are a few veterans in the room, so thank you all for your service. Let's keep our people overseas right now in our thoughts and prayers as they do what they're doing each and every day. Now, when we thought about doing this, normally I give this presentation in an 18-hour class to a bunch of investment bankers. But Ralph and Andy and I came together and said, you know, this is neurosurgery. These are brain surgeons. They can probably handle it in about 45 minutes. But I'm not sure if that's because you're so much smarter than everybody or because you have short attention span. So we'll just have to see how this goes. But we're here today because leadership is special. You know, it's in my career, I have noticed that the difference between high-performing organizations, mediocre organizations, and failing organizations really boils down to leadership. It's true in the military, it's true in business, it's true in sports, it's true in academia, and I'm sure it's true in medicine as well. The problem is that not a lot of these organizations spend a great deal of time teaching their young people about how to be leaders. Often somebody enters as a technician, an expert, a technical expert of some sort, and grows in their career through that process in a very intense fashion in many cases, but is not exposed to leadership training. And then suddenly one day they're thrown into a leadership position and they perhaps are a little bit lost when that happens. So it's a really smart thing to try to learn about leadership as a lifelong journey, and it's smart for you today. I hope you get something out of today, but it's smart for you today to be at least taking a brief pause to think about leadership, and hopefully you'll learn something there. So how do you learn about leadership? Well, there are three things, I think, in any discipline that you have to do. One is study, and in the case of leadership, you can read books about leadership and books about leaders, biographies, that sort of thing. It also requires close personal observation, not just watching a leader, but thoughtfully thinking about why did that leader do what he or she did. And you can learn from the good ones, and you can also learn from maybe the not so good ones, as I did both in my career. And then the third way is, of course, practice, experience. What we say in the military is running to the sound of the guns. And for especially those of you who are young, anytime you're offered the opportunity to do anything in leadership, whether it's a club or whether it's a little branch of something, then you should take it, because the lessons are generally a lot cheaper when you're young than they are when you're old. But leadership is an extremely complex subject. There is no soundbite, there is no self-help book that will get you through that process. You do have to do that lifelong journey. And I believe that along the way, it's really helpful if you have a framework for understanding leadership where you can hang the knowledge that you gain, that I still gain every day, on the hooks on that framework. And that's what I, in the latter part of my career, began doing, was trying to construct, what does my framework look like? What does it feel like? What have I learned and what am I still learning? And I came up with 5, because I'm a Navy guy, what I call anchors of leadership. They are leading yourself, leading people, leading organizations, leading execution, and leading change. And each of those 5 anchors has 4 critical threads that run through each one of them. Now that's 4 times 5 is 20, and we have about maybe 35 minutes to talk about this. So it's gonna go fast. So buckle your seatbelts. It's gonna be about 2 minutes per thread, but you can read more about it and we can talk about it when we have a chance for questions. So it all begins with leadership anchor number 1, which is leading yourself. You cannot lead other people until you are fully confident and capable of leading your own self. And the very beginning of that, and the most important thread that I will talk about all day long today, is character, developing character. Now, I would tell you that a substantial majority of the young sailors that join the Navy come from the bottom half of a high school graduating class. But they all have PhDs in character recognition. They can sniff out a leader that is not that is selfish or self-centered or whatever very, very quickly. And I think there's a lot that goes into character, but there are 4 things that I concentrate on the most. The first one is integrity, always doing the difficult right thing rather than the easy wrong thing. The second one is genuine humility, not false humility. It's one of the 2 things that Jim Collins, in his very good book, Good to Great, if you have a chance to read that, talks about as the pillars of good leadership, genuine humility. Another is courage, both moral and physical courage. You know, physical courage is what caused men to get off the landing craft at Normandy Beach on D-Day. Moral courage is a little bit harder for especially young people sometimes to understand, but it is doing the difficult right thing. And then empathy. How can you lead people unless you can actually try to put yourself in their shoes and understand where they're coming from? Because everybody you know has something going on in their lives that you maybe don't understand. And you don't have to be nosy about it, but having the empathy to try to understand where they're coming from is terribly important as a leader. So that's number one. We could talk about that for 20 minutes. Number two is lifelong learning. Now, I feel a little funny standing in front of a room full of neurosurgeons lecturing you on lifelong learning, because you guys are constantly updating your knowledge, constantly doing training and that sort of thing. So I know where you're coming from there, but I'm talking about also learning that's not only deep in your profession, but broad, alongside your profession and outside your profession. Because one of the things, and we'll talk about this towards the very end, is that creativity, the act of creativity, and very often is bringing two completely disparate ideas together in a way that has never been done before. And if you're going to be able to do that, you have to extend your learning and your knowledge beyond your own profession. And you can find the most amazing things, and I can give you an example of how I did a much better job of landing an F-14 on an aircraft carrier at night on a pitching deck in bad weather because I learned a little bit about neuroscience. And it's probably all wrong, but this was back when Carl Sagan wrote The Dragons of Eden, and I learned that the right brain and the left brain perform differently, and it dawned on me that landing on an aircraft carrier is a profoundly right brain activity. And if you don't energize the right brain, or if you have the left brain energized instead of the right brain, you're gonna have a rough night. So that was very instructional for me, and I actually passed that knowledge through the F-14 committee. So that'll kind of give you a sense for lifelong learning being important. The third one about leading yourself is commitment. It's amazing how many, hopefully infrequently, but sometimes you see a leader who achieves a leadership position and then sits back and goes, okay, now it's my turn. I can just sort of give guidance and delegate and whatever. And what you find is the most effective organizations have the most committed leaders. The ones who run to work every morning, the ones who persevere in difficulty, who teach, who are involved without micromanaging, but who are involved and they're deeply committed to their job. And that's the second thing that Jim Collins talks about in his book, Good to Great, as being the two most important things a leader has is humility and what he calls will, which I call commitment, those two things. The last thing under leading yourself is something deeply personal that I call, to a bunch of neurosurgeons of course, manage your brain, okay? And what I mean by that is that as a leader, particularly as you get to be a senior leader, there are a lot of stressful situations that come your way. It's either a long-term type of stress where you're really worried about something that's going on for a long time, or it's an acute stress because of a crisis. And you have to learn to teach yourself to manage that, because everybody in your organization is watching you, just like your kids watch you, okay? They're watching you, and if you are calm, they will be calm. If you panic, they will panic. So how do you learn to manage stress? Well, in naval aviation, we have a simple way of doing it. Maybe too simple, but we teach our young aviators to put your anxieties, the things you're worried about, in a figurative box in the corner. And then only open that box when you need to open that box. And the rest of the time, focus on what you're doing. Because again, you cannot land an airplane on an aircraft carrier at night when the deck is moving and it's crappy weather if you're thinking about your parents' health, or you're thinking about your financial situation, or your relationship. We pack it away and we open it up when we need to. And then of course all the things that, here I am talking to doctors again, about sleep and exercise and substance use and managing your relationships to try to remove the things that could be contributing to the stress in your life. But that's managing your brain. So 4 things under leading yourself: character, lifelong education, commitment, and manage your doggone brain. Okay, second anchor is leading people. Of course, you have to have a section on leading people if you're going to talk about leadership. And the first anchor there is building an amazing team. And there are some amazing teams from all across the country in this room that I've had a chance to meet today. It's remarkable to me, and frankly, I'm blown away that many of you flew to St. Louis for this event today. But you are leading amazing teams, and you have to do the work to do that. It may not be the thing you spend the most time on, but it may be one of the most important things that you spend time on, is getting, as Jim Collins once again says, getting the right people on the bus, and frankly, getting the wrong people off the bus. And I learned that as a young F-14 squadron commander when there was a department head that I wanted, and I just decided I wasn't going to take no for an answer. And the people who do personnel assignments in the Navy didn't want me to have this person. And I finally just wouldn't leave them alone, and they gave up. And I got the guy, and it turned out to be great. So I was like, maybe if I just really work at this, I could get a really good team. And if I get a really good team, that releases me to do other things because I can trust that really good team. So, and then, of course, as you know, again, speaking to a room of neurosurgeons, you have to give your team opportunities to develop themselves as they grow in their careers. And that's sometimes hard to do, particularly with your really good people that you depend on the most. Letting them go to develop themselves can be very tough. I know that. Okay, so that's the first part of leading people. The next part of leading people is connecting with your people. And there are a lot of leaders out there who sort of sit in their offices and do their jobs. But you've got to get out and you've got to connect with your people at two sort of different levels or venues or whatever you want to call it. You need to connect with individuals, and you need to connect with generations. Connecting with individuals is getting out and asking them questions. How are they doing without being nosy? Hey, where are you from? One of my favorite questions. It's an easy entry into meeting a young sailor. But how's it really going out there? And how's your family doing? Is there anything we can do better for you? Just sort of connecting with those people makes all the difference in the world to them because they know that you genuinely care about them if you're having those kinds of conversations. And learning their names, which is a constant struggle for me. My mother was amazing at this, is something that's very, very difficult, but really important to try to do. Leading generations is really interesting if you go out and do some research on what the different generations are all about. You know, leadership is 95% the same principles, but there's that layer of 5% that really is different between individual generations. Boomers are different from millennials, are different from Gen Xers and Gen Zers, and knowing how they think is very useful to you as a leader. And I discovered that as a very senior officer in the Pentagon when I found out that the people who were working for me did not want to sit in their cubicles and have no contact with me doing their projects because we would be producing briefings that would go to the White House Situation Room. They were amazed when I would get on the keyboard, fingers on the keyboard, working on PowerPoint presentations with them and telling them, I hope I didn't mess up your presentation too much, that kind of thing. But that was not micromanagement, it was micro-participation with them, and they loved it. But that was a particular generation. There's other generations that don't want anything to do with that, so learning that is pretty important. So that's connecting with your people. The third thing under leading people is something that Colin Powell taught for me. I really had a privilege to work for that remarkable gentleman who was the first African-American chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And I was his personal aide. I was carrying his bags, arranging his travel, doing all that kind of stuff. But what a learning experience that was. We were riding in the car one day, and just out of the blue, he said, Sandy, the essence of leading people is holding them to the highest possible standards while at the same time you take the best possible care of them. And you think about that, it's really simple, but it's really profound. If you do one and not the other, it doesn't work. If all you do is hold people to high standards, but you don't take care of them, they'll do what you ask them to do, but they're gonna vote with their feet. If all you do is hold them to high standard, all you do is take care of them, they're gonna go crazy on you, just like your kids, right? But if you do them together, if a sailor knows that they are being held to a high standard. And we have a saying in the military that says, morale never goes up when standards go down. They will live up to those standards. These young people are amazing, but they also want to know that you care about them. And how do you care about them? You do it in little ways. Obviously, you make sure that they're fed well, trained well, that they operate in a safe mental and physical working environment. But a little thank you note, a little coin every now and then, a little recognition means everything, especially when it's coming from a very senior leader. So that is sort of high standards and high care. The last thing under leading people is trust and teamwork. The first thing that I think about when I work with somebody new is, can I trust this person? I want to learn as quickly as I can whether I can trust them. And the first thing that I worry about the most, ever, is that somebody might not trust me, because that means I've failed in a major way. So building that trust and teamwork is really, really important. It's something you see in small units, like SEAL teams, like cockpits of fighter aircraft, like conning rooms of submarines and the like. And building that teamwork is really leaders' business. It takes a lot of effort, training, care, in order to build that teamwork so that it endures. So that's leading people. I'm not going to repeat what I just said, but That's probably one of the most important things you can do as a leader. The third one, it sounds like it's bureaucratic, but it's really leading organizations. And the first thing about leading organizations, the first thread is firmly establish your culture, okay? Culture, the word culture comes from, the root word in Latin is cultura, which means preparing the ground for crops. And that's exactly what you're doing in your organization. You're preparing the ground of your organization in order to have the most fertile ground for the activity that you happen to be doing. And culture is obviously something that a leader has to pay immense attention to. It's hard to create, and it's easy to destroy, but it's something that is easy to sense pretty quickly. I can go on the bridge of a ship that's about to get underway and just stand there and listen for about 10 minutes, and I can tell you whether the culture is good on that ship or not. And I'm sure that many of you can do the same thing. You can walk into an operating room, you can walk into a enterprise rent-a-car branch, and you can pretty quickly sense whether the culture is good or not. So, very important part of leading organizations. The second part is to think strategically. Obviously, you want to think strategically, but it's surprising how many people actually focus mostly on their operational work, and I see this in one of the companies on which I'm a board of, not on enterprise, where they're very, very focused operationally, and they've lost the big plot, the big picture, strategically. So what do I think of when I'm thinking strategy? There's really two things. One is an essential balance among four variables. And those four variables are your operating environment, your ends that you're trying to achieve, the ways that you are trying to achieve those things, and then the means that you have available to achieve those things. And if one of those things changes, the equilibrium among those four falls out of balance, and one of the other three variables has to adjust. In the national security context, if the security environment with something like China is deteriorating, well, then we either need to change our ambition, our ends in that relationship, or we need to go for more means in order to maintain our balance, or we need to be more clever in the way we think about ways. And I will tell you that the natural human tendency in restoring that balance is always to ask for more means, because it's the easiest thing to do. The hardest thing to do is to become more clever about your ways, and we'll get to that when we talk about leading change. But that's thinking, the first part of thinking strategically. The second part is putting together some kind of a campaign plan. Actions arranged in space and time with potential branches and sequels, when things aren't going well for you, and kind of running that through and challenging the assumptions that go along with that. That's hard work, it's leader work, it's executive work to try to make sure that you've got a good strategy in place. But strategy is terribly important. The third part under leading organizations is my train of thought. The third part is understanding power. Power kind of feels, especially to young people, like an ugly word, right? Power. That means you're exercising power over people. But really, that's the way things get done, is through power. And there are a lot of different types of power out there. There's coercion power, where I'm going to do this bad thing to you if you don't do what I tell you to do. There's reward power. I'm going to give you this really sweet thing if you do what I ask you to do. There's positional power. I am the boss in this particular place, so this is the way we're going to do things. There's expert power, which means I'm the smartest person in the room, and so kind of what I say is probably what we ought to do. There's something called referent power, which is really charisma. I'm the most charismatic person here, and people are going to follow me. And it really behooves you as a leader to understand what kind of power is available to you, what kind of power you're good at, and to recognize the situations that require a particular use of a particular type of power or combination thereof. And there are all kinds of books out there. There's actually a book called Power, like 48 Rules of Power. It's a little bit, tough to read, but it is an interesting topic that is worth your time to kind of understand and think about how different power is being used around you. And then the last part of leading organizations is maybe one of the most important ones, and that is communications, right? As a leader, it's incumbent on you to be a good communicator. You have to develop yourself into a good communicator, and you have to understand how communications work. And whenever I think of communicating with individuals or particularly groups, I think of 6 things that have to be done or have to be accounted for. The first thing is, who is the audience? And it sounds like a trite question, but it actually really matters that you think through who the audience really is. What is the message that you're actually trying to get through to that audience? Who is the messenger going to be? And it may not actually be you, the leader, it may be somebody else or some other method. What is the medium you're going to use to get that message across? And your timing of the message is another factor that's very, very important. And then finally, a feedback mechanism. Because unless you're listening to the echoes of how your messages are being received and whether they're being received accurately, you're not going to be a very effective communicator. And you have to do all 6 of those things well, or you will not be a good communicator. Or maybe you can be lucky, like I was. When I was the commander of U.S. Northern Command, I was trying very hard to rebuild our military-to-military relationship with Mexico, which had suffered for a long time, and did all kinds of things like baseball diplomacy with their Army chief and golf diplomacy with their Navy chief, because that's the kind of things they like to do. And I was continually frustrated by senior U.S. government officials who would make some well-meaning statement, but they would make it in a way that was very offensive to the Mexican people and the Mexican military. And I decided, okay, I'm gonna write an op-ed. It's gonna get in the Washington Post or the New York Times, talking about how actually pretty good the Mexican military was and how they were making all these sacrifices in order to try to roll up drug kingpins and that sort of thing. It was really something to watch. And just as I was about to try to send it to the New York Times or whatever, another U.S. official makes a really stupid remark, and I said, heck with it. I'm gonna put it on my blog, on my webpage at Northcom, and little did I know that I had 30,000 followers on that blog. I didn't know 20,000 of them were in Mexico. And this article was very complimentary of the Mexican military. Next day, top of the fold, Mexico City newspaper, this guy gets it. It's like, oh wow, I got lucky there, didn't I? But it was one of those things that really crystallized in my mind the importance of all those 6 factors that I had to do as the Northern Command Commander and other jobs as well. So that's communications. Now, in developing yourself as a communicator, particularly for young people, because all you old people are already good communicators probably, it's really important to focus both on writing and on presenting. And on writing, it takes a lot of practice. I have a saying that you can be incredibly smart and not be a good writer, but you cannot be a good writer unless you're a good thinker. And if I see some young person who's a gifted writer, I know I have a good thinker on my hands. And so if you want to be thought of as a good thinker, learn to write well. And it takes a lot of thoughtful practice, critique of how you actually construct the things that you're writing, and we don't have time to get into that too much today. When it comes to speaking, a lot of people really don't spend that much time on it, but there are a lot of nuances that you want to master as a good speaker, including trying to get rid of the word because we humans, when we pause and we're trying to think of the next thing we're going to say, we don't like silence, so we say I'm still bad about that. I try to purge that out of my own inventory. But the only way you can do that sort of thing is to film yourself, or have a friend of yours critique you, brutally critique you on your presentation, and you'll be amazed at how quickly you can improve your ability to speak. And it's a lot like writing, only it's more difficult, I think, because you now are presenting live in front of a bunch of people. So communicating, very, very important. So that's leading organizations. The next thing is leading execution. We all have jobs to do. We want to get them done safely. We want to get them done well, accurately, particularly in your profession, both of the professions represented in this room. You have to execute really, really well. So the first thread under execution is something that changed my life, which was going through the Navy nuclear propulsion program. I had 15 years out of Georgia Tech, out of college, and now I got to go back to nuclear power school for 18 months. Wow. What an amazing, difficult experience. It's like going to medical school maybe after you've been out of college for 15 years. I don't know, it's probably easier than medical school. But what I learned was that program uses 6 operational excellence principles that are interrelated and that they really rely upon. And they don't even advertise them very much, but they're there. And the first one is integrity. If I have a nuclear propulsion plant operating and somebody makes a mistake, I don't want to have to do a lot of detective work finding out what that mistake was and what the implications are. I got to know right now. So we teach those young kids, if you make a mistake, tell us. You'll be fine. We'll take you out and retrain you if we need to, but we're not going to kill you if you will just tell us. But if you don't tell us, if you lie to us, you're gone that day. We will not give you a second chance. Integrity is so important to us. The second one is level of knowledge. Remember, we talked a minute ago about lifelong learning. We want to give you the knowledge so that if you're in a submarine under the ice and you can't phone home, you can figure out what to do on your own because you're so smart. I had to know what every single thing was made of in that propulsion plant. Why? Well, I don't know. It just gave me a lot more confidence in being an operator. So that was level of knowledge. Procedural compliance. It's a really big deal to violate a procedure in that world unless you have a thoughtful reason for doing it, like you're under the ice and something's different. So procedural compliance. What we call formal communication. I think this will really resonate with the neurosurgeons in the room. We call it formal communication, but it's really an environment of formality. I could be starting that nuclear propulsion plant next to my very best drinking buddy friend. But when we're doing that, that goes out the window. An environment, a feeling descends upon us of complete professionalism. And when an order is given, it's repeated back verbally so that I know that the person who I gave the order to understood it and that they know that they were right and they repeat back to me. It's that formal. And it sounds kind of militaristic, but it actually works really, really well. Another one is what we call forceful backup. Whenever we're doing something somewhat dangerous or risky, like starting up a nuclear reactor as opposed to running one at steady state, we always have somebody standing behind the people who are doing it, who's an expert in the field, but who isn't tasked with doing anything. They just are an observer. And they make sure, because they can sense if something's going wrong, they can say something. By the same token, if somebody is involved in an operation and they don't like what's happening, the youngest person in the room can say, "Stop," and everybody stops. And if they were wrong and everything was actually okay, they don't get in trouble for that. It's like we just retrain them, hey, everything was okay, here's why, but thank you for being bold enough to say stop. And then the last thing is what we call questioning attitude. Usually when there's something wrong, there's more than one thing wrong, right? If you pull the string on something, you'll find that there's maybe some further root cause well above that. And we really train our people to question everything they see, question everything that they look at. If they're walking around a propulsion plant and they see a gauge that's been increasing over time, it's like, well, I wonder why that's happening. So we train them to have that questioning attitude. Those 6 things are not only an important way of how we do business, it's how we debrief events. If we have let's say a close call or something like that, we'll actually bring people in and go, so which principles were violated here? And you normally find that you can survive 1, but you can't survive 2. And that, you usually find when something was a close call that there were 2 principles violated, not just 1. So really important thing, that's operational excellence. The next thing about execution, leading execution, the next thread, is deciding, right? Napoleon had a saying, like one of the hardest things for a leader to do is decide, right? And again, back to Colin Powell used to say, there's a window of between 40 and 70%, where if you have enough of that information to make a decision, then you should make the decision. And if you have more than 70%, you may well have waited too long to make the decision, accumulating more than 70%. But if you have less than 40%, you may not have the information you need in order to make a good decision. So finding that sweet spot as a leader, and then of course understanding the temporal need of that decision. If you don't have to make the decision, then wait for more information to come in. But if it's an urgent situation, try to fit that sweet spot and then make your decision and move on. And there are a lot of barriers and impediments to decision making. We don't have enough information. We've never seen this before, so we have to think about it a little bit. We're not really sure who in the room is even allowed to make this decision. And we're just afraid of making a wrong decision and getting fired or getting in trouble. There's a lot of those impediments, and as a leader, you kind of have to work your way through those, because sometimes they can be actually accurate, but other times perhaps not. So deciding and then operational excellence are the first 2 threads under leading execution. The third one is embracing risk and adversity. And I think, if I were a neurosurgeon, I'd be thinking about risk all the time, right? And as a fighter pilot, I'm thinking about risk all the time. One of the things that kept me in the Navy as long as I was there was the adrenaline that came along with not taking gambles, but actually being in a risky situation and putting the things in place required to manage it. And that's what a lot of businesses do, your enterprise resource management, where you're looking for the high probability, high consequence, low probability, low consequence things. It's a matrix. That's a good way of managing risk. Our special operations forces manage risk by looking at risk to mission and risk to force. So if I'm going to rescue a hostage in Somalia, which I had to brief to President Obama one time, we start with, hey, the risk to the mission is all these things could go wrong. The hostage could be unfortunately killed. We could have a mistake that gets us in trouble with another country. All those potential risks. And then the risk to force is, what is the risk to our own people? Because we want to manage that. And then you put mitigations in place, and you try to get that high to medium risk down to a medium to low risk. And then the decision maker can decide whether they want to take that risk by executing the operation or not. And I would tell you that every single time I took one of these in, our special operations guys had done a really good job of mitigating the risk, except one time we were turned down on a mission to rescue a hostage that was being held by Somali pirates on a ship. And it was not turned down by the president, it was turned down by the Secretary of Defense. He just didn't feel comfortable. Okay, fine, we can live with that. We've got a good process in place to manage risk. And embracing that as a leader is something that your people will appreciate rather than shying away from risk. And then the last thing under managing or operational excellence is one of my favorites in this room, which is measure wisely. We humans, we leaders, we always want to measure stuff, right? And in my experience, people have had a tendency to sort of gravitate towards the easily measurable. And sometimes that can drive you in the wrong direction, okay? And I tend to look at metrics in a two-dimensional matrix. One is input metrics and output metrics, and the other is quantifiable metrics and non-quantifiable metrics, or pseudo-quantifiable metrics. So the killer metric is the quantifiable output metric. And to use an Air Force example, you might have somebody say, sortie completion rate is how we're going to measure our air campaign against the enemy. How many sorties out of 100 did we complete? Well, that's not an output metric. That's an input metric. That's an output metric of your maintenance effort, maybe, but it's an input metric to your campaign. The real output metric of the campaign is, what am I doing to the enemy? And you might be able to measure that exactly or imprecisely, but at least you can measure it. And I think that it's important to have that understanding because you can use both input and output metrics. Now, my favorite example of a metric is right here in this room. Back in, I don't know what the date was, but Enterprise realized that they were having a little bit of an issue with customer service. And I think it was Andy who came up with the idea of, well, why don't we measure customer service? I mean, his father, Jack, had always said, take care of your customers and take care of your employees, and the rest will take care of itself. Part of culture, by the way. But how do we measure customer satisfaction? Well, they started this process that now everybody uses, where they ask two simple questions. Were you completely satisfied, somewhat dissatisfied? You guys know all the actual levels there. And you can't get promoted in Enterprise unless your branch is in the top 50% of that completely satisfied ESQI number. Really cool. And then the other thing is, would you recommend Enterprise or National or Alamo to somebody else? Another really important. I've actually been asked that question on an airplane. It was really pretty amazing to get that phone call. They actually do this. And the important thing that they do, and this relates to the medical community a little bit, is they have an outside service do this, so it can't be corrupted. Now, the VA went through this a few years ago when they were asking how do customers feel, or patients feel about their experience at the VA hospitals, but they did it internally, and it got corrupted. Okay, so you have to do this externally, if at all possible. But it's a magnificent thing. And how cool is it that a company can really think of that as their principal metric? Yeah, they got a top line, they got a bottom line, but they know that the thing they've got to focus on the most is their customers, and the rest of it takes care of itself. Right, Andy?
Yes, sir.
All right, so good. So that is measure wisely. Now we're down to, I believe, our last one, which is one of my favorites, if not my favorite, is leading change. All of us will do that if we haven't already at some point in our careers. Many of you have done that successfully before, but it's a fascinating topic. And the first thread in leading change is challenging all of the assumptions. One of my own favorite personal sayings that I've invented, I haven't invented many personal sayings, but this is one of them, is that incredibly bright adults will work unbelievably long hours perfecting fundamentally flawed concepts. I mean, think about that. You've seen people who are really, really bright and hardworking people who just don't really challenge what they're seeing. They just go in there and drill in, and they work to perfect it. I found this as a young officer in the F-14 community when we were using a tactic to try to defend aircraft carriers from Russian bombers coming out to shoot at us, potentially shoot at us. And that tactic violated every single principle of war that I could find. And as a baby, I didn't know whether I could challenge that or not. But I did, and we ended up writing a computer program and trying new tactics and that sort of thing, and it really made a difference. So that was sort of what lit the fuse in my mind. It's like, okay, I can do this. And it was one of the things that stimulated me my entire career, was challenging the assumptions. I think Steve Jobs said, the only people who are able to change the world are the people who are crazy enough to think they can. And it takes a certain amount of gumption to go out there and challenge every assumption. Now, it's one of the things that we try to do in every military campaign plan, is the first thing you do is you establish your assumptions, and an assumption is very carefully defined what it actually is. It's a belief or a perception that if it's wrong, will cause you to have to change your plan. It's not just a piece of information, it's not just a fact. It's actually something that if it's incorrect, it causes you to change your plan. So what's the last thing you do after you finish your planning process? You challenge your assumptions. You go, okay, what if this assumption's wrong? What is this going to do to my plan? I would argue that potentially the exit from Afghanistan that we saw a few years ago, I'll stay out of politics on that one because I can blame both sides on that. But what really didn't happen well enough in that operation was challenging the assumptions that the Afghanistan National Army was going to survive another 6 months. It survived maybe another 6 days is all it survived. And how would that have made a difference in the planning is just an example I offer up to you. So challenge the assumptions. The second thing you have to do as a leader in leading change is lead the creative process. You may not be the most creative person in the world, or you may be really creative, but you can set up a process that works. And there are really sort of two ways creativity happens. One is in the mind of maybe a polymath, somebody who's done that thing I referred to earlier. They did lifelong learning, both in their profession and alongside their profession and on the outskirts of their profession, and they're able to actually spot the things like, hey, what if we did these two things that nobody's ever done before? It's one of the things that Stephen King says, the novelist, is that things tend to pop out of nowhere that are two ideas that I had never considered before, and it turns into a novel. And so a single person can do that, but a single leader is also capable of bringing a diverse group of people into a room, challenging them with a problem, and then giving them the freedom to be a little frivolous if necessary, but to come up with potential solutions to the problem. And 9 out of 10 of them may be really stupid ideas, but you never know when that group, especially if they're a set of diverse thinkers, are going to come out with something that is actually profound, or maybe just a minor change, but an important change. So leading that creative process is important. And the most creative thinkers in an organization can be some of the most difficult people to manage, by the way. I know, because I was one of them. But it is an important thing for a leader to be cognizant of how that works. The third thing you have to do as a leader in leading change is overcoming resistance. And I like to think of overcoming resistance as a sort of set of concentric circles of change. The innermost circle is the circle of ignorance. And I don't mean stupidity. I just mean people don't know the idea yet. So they have to be educated on what the new idea is. And the better as a leader you can do to explain that clearly so that people really get it the first time, the easier it's going to be for you to get through the next few circles. But that is obviously people have to learn about your new idea. The second circle is a troublesome one called denial. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Or, this is going to create a lot of work for me that I really don't want to do because I'm going to have to learn this new idea. Or worse, this idea could threaten my job. So maybe I want to resist it. Or maybe I'm just in a bad mood. But that denial circle is a very difficult circle to get people through if they are there. The next circle is kind of related to that second circle. It's called vicious compliance, where people go, okay, all right, I know I got to do this idea now, but that sucks, and I'm going to show you how bad it is, and I'm going to show you that it's not going to work. Okay, get over that. The next circle is what I call well-intended misapplication, where people go, okay, I got it. I'm ahead of everybody else. I'm starting to believe in this thing, and I'm making a name for myself, but they don't necessarily quite get it, and they make some mistakes. Well-intended misapplication. And then the last circle is when somebody really gets it. They're a champion. They're a culture-carrying mentor. They can teach people, and they're on your side. So the reason that's all important to me is that I want to know when I'm leading a change and I'm talking to somebody, I want to know what circle they're in, because it's a different conversation each time, right? If it's a ignorance discussion, it's a patient explaining of the idea. Did you get it? How can I answer your questions? If it's a denial one, it might be a short and exciting conversation, as Vern Clark used to put it. And then if it's a well-intended misapplication, it might be a gentle arm around. It's like, hey, you're getting it, really appreciate it, but let me show you a couple things you might be missing here. And then when you have that champion, it's really bolstering their confidence and appreciation for them buying into the idea. Now that's kind of structural and all that, but you get what I'm saying, is really understanding where people are, how your organization is reacting to the change, because organizations react differently to changes depending on how they're timed and how they're presented and the like. And the last thread of all of these 20 threads is kind of sailing upwind. The name of the book is, and I'm not trying to sell a book, because if you've ever written a book, you don't sell books to make money, unless you're Stephen King, okay? But the name of the book alludes to sailing a sailboat upwind, which is a counterintuitive idea where you're taking a thing against a prevailing force field called the wind, and somehow you manage to get it upwind, which is sort of a metaphor for me sort of fighting things my whole career, trying to push against the system to it was just exhilarating to try to bring positive change. You have to be bold if you're going to do this. You have to be able to say to yourself, if this doesn't work out, there are other things I can do. I can be an airline pilot. No offense to any airline pilots in here. But nobody is going to back you other than your spouse and your dog if you're running into difficulty. And sometimes you have to push very, very hard. And it's amazing how many really good ideas tend to fall to the cutting room floor because people just aren't bold enough to carry them through. And the other thing I had to really force myself to do was, because I always wanted to move to the next idea, is to actually spend the energy required to get this thing across the finish line. That's the thing that's my biggest personal flaw, is making sure that I stick with that idea and get it through where it needs to be gotten before I try to move on to the next fun thing. Okay, so being bold. There's an old Russian proverb that says, no risk, no champagne. And as a leader, you have to be willing and able to take risk. So that is leading yourself, leading people, leading organizations, leading execution, and leading change. What fun to be able to do that throughout your career. And I swear to you, I am still learning every single day from leaders that I see, both good leaders and not so good leaders. It is truly a lifelong journey. And I hope this has been helpful to you and your lifelong journey. And I think, Ralph, we might have time for like one or two questions. Does that work for you? Okay, so what do you think? Any questions? Just yell out your question and I'll repeat it if you have one. Anyone? Sir? You're going to ask me about drones, aren't you?
So the concept of vicious compliance. So in the military, I get the sense you have more control over people who are complying viciously to do out in the real world. What's the difference between what you do on an aircraft carrier, what you do in the neurosurgery department?
Well, I've done a hernia operation, but I've never done a neurosurgery operation. But I did have a chance to interview a very gifted neurosurgeon on my podcast, so that was a really fun experience. In the military, in theory, you have the ability to say, damn it, just do it. do it my way. But that only takes you so far as a leader. You want people to buy in to what you're doing. And so being patient, and you can sense when people are, grumbling about a change and don't necessarily want to do it. I'll give you an example. On USS Enterprise, you have duty sections on an aircraft carrier where a certain number of people, when you're in port, at home, have to be on the ship. Because, you can't everybody just doesn't go home from the ship and leave it. Because, you could have flooding or you could have a fire or some kind of an emergency. So there's always a certain percentage of the crew that's there. And when I got to Enterprise, it was 1 in 3 duty sections. So that meant 1/3 of the crew was on the ship every night in port. That meant they were away from their families 1 out of every 3 nights, unless they were on leave. And we had 3,500 sailors on that ship and that crew. So we had 1,000 people on that ship. And so I said, look, we're gonna go to 1 in 12. And the chief petty officers on the ship said, whoa, no, we've never done it that way. If it ain't broken, don't fix it. And I said, no, we're gonna go to 12. And it's actually going to be better for us because we're not gonna go to 12 until I have the entire crew fully qualified in damage control. And what did that do in a sneaky little way? Was it meant that we were a much safer ship wherever we were, in port, underway, or in combat, if everybody on the ship knew how to do damage control. And what it did is it got them 1 in 12. And you want to talk about morale going off the roof, but there was a lot of healthy skepticism among my chief petty officers, the people who kind of really run the ship. And I had to kind of milk them along. I had to have that conversation. It wasn't a denial conversation where it was a short and exciting conversation, but it was a vicious compliance, like, come on guys, this is gonna work, but we're not gonna pull the trigger on this until everybody's qualified. And you wouldn't believe how fast people got qualified on that ship. So that's the kind of thing I'm talking about. You have to, no matter what kind of leadership situation, you have to nurture people along. Sir?
Very interesting. It seems to me you left out one huge component in the development of the leader, and that's genetics. And it strikes me that there are very smart people who do not have the genetic makeup to adopt those lessons you're trying to teach them. And there are others that can. And how do you utilize that in selecting the leaders that you need, whether it's in government or army or air force?
Yeah, that's an interesting question that I quite honestly haven't spent a lot of time on. But the genetic question of, some people just aren't going to be, born or raised or whatever to lead. I don't know if it's genetics or if it's just upbringing. But I know in the military, we try to give people the opportunity to be leaders. Every single person is given an opportunity to be a leader. And as you point out, not everyone is cut out for it. And you have to kind of discover that as quickly as you can, and you don't get rid of them, you just put them in a job where they're maybe not going to be a leader. And I think it's, one of the things you have to do as a leader, and I meant to mention this, is you have to watch the performance of your subordinate leaders. It's really easy to be lulled into a sense of, this person's a really good leader because they're telling me everything I want to know. Everything's going great. But if you get down to the deck plates every now and then, you can't spend too much time on that, but you get down there and you go by yourself. You can't take the leader with you. You go by yourself and you say, hey, how's it going? You can pretty much sniff out when you have a subordinate leader who's not very good, maybe doesn't have the makeup to be a leader. And either you retrain that person, mentor them, or they get to go on to something different.
Sandy, can I make a comment? That was a really interesting question, Robert. And you have to know about these guys sitting together over there. They have no doubt that they have the right genes for doing what they do. That's one thing. That's one thing they lead in.
It's an interesting point, Ralph, but I will tell you this. I had to learn this. The one thing I had to learn early that I didn't know inherently, because when I came in the Navy, I wanted to be a fighter pilot. I wanted to be the best fighter pilot ever. I didn't really realize that I was going to be expected to lead young enlisted people. And there's a tendency sometimes among people in that group, in the group I was in, to kind of treat them as though, like, okay, you're just taking care of the airplanes, you're pumping up my tires and putting gas in the airplane, okay, whatever. But these are real people, and they've got aspirations. And they're looking at us pilots as heroes, like, man, I wish I could do what that guy's doing. So you have to develop the empathy that I talked about earlier. It's like, where are these kids coming from? And I'll tell you, spending 2 minutes talking to a plane captain in an F-14 about where he's from and what his family's doing, and have you bought a car lately? Oh, you need help buying a car? I got a chief petty officer who can help you buy that car because you're going to get screwed by a car dealer. Not an enterprise car dealer, mind you, but other, not quite as moral car dealers. But anyway, so yeah, it is a lot of, it's not a natural thing. You have to learn it. It's a good point. Sir.
I think something also that's very important for a leader is to recognize what Dr. Spetzel just said, is that not everybody has the genes or whatever to be that leader, but you need to still cultivate the middle guys that aren't going to be that leader, because they're important for the whole team, right? You can't have about 30 leaders and nobody under. You got to have the other people that, they don't quite have that, but they got to be nurtured and taken care of and recognized, because they're an important part too.
Totally agree, and leadership occurs at many levels. And when you think about true leadership, it can occur at the lowest level. If you have a young kid who's steering the ship, alongside another ship 140 feet away at 13 knots while you're tied together transferring fuel and ammunition and groceries, and somebody makes a mistake and says, come right instead of come left, and that person says, sir, is that what you really meant? Can I just challenge you on that order? That's leadership. It's a different kind of leadership, but yeah, instilling in them the confidence to do that. And there are certain genres of folks where you have to really get them to do this. And one of the 4 things we talked about in terms of character is courage. And giving people the courage to actually step out and be a leader, even though they're not comfortable. They may have imposter syndrome or something like that, is something really good for a leader to just kind of put them in that situation, particularly at a young age, where they start to develop confidence. That's a good point. Sir?
I was served in the Pentagon in 2011 when you arrived. And I remember in the early days of your arrival, and I put it in this pretty typical joint staff blue folder. There's 100,000 of these running around the Pentagon. But in your early days, as I was an action officer on the Iraq desk, you gave us all a 5-page, pretty much what you talked about today. I mean, there's probably some differences in here, but I've kept this ever since in this folder. And it just talks about your leadership and what you expect of us on the staff and how you operate. And I remember many of the things that I've written had lots of red ink. In one visit where you said, come see me, I thought I was going to get treated out. You sat desk side with me and said, this is how you can approve this for the chairman or for the security defense. You were elevating me. So thank you for that.
Well,
but I was curious, that document, I got to believe that's something you created over time. How did you come to delivering that as a leader to the entire staff, and what was the motivation to want to do something like that? It's not something every leader does.
Yeah, I think, as I mentioned, as a young leader, I started to get curious about leadership. And I've just had a bad habit of writing everything down. And it's something my English teacher taught me in high school. It's like, if you're going to write something, just carry a piece of paper around with you. Now it's my phone. Carry a piece of paper around with you and write down everything that occurs to you in the 2 weeks before this paper is due, and then bring it all together. And there's kind of a version of that is I would write down, whether it was actual tactical stuff, I would write that down. But things about leadership I would write down that I learned from other people or from my own experience. And I just gathered them together over time, and started as a squadron commander, as a Navy commander, 05, and then progressed into being a deep, executive officer. Now I'm the executive officer, the second in command of a big organization, an aircraft carrier, learning. And then the captain of a amphibious ship, learning. And then it just kept accumulating. And I was really worried. If you say it's 5 pages, I think I still have a copy on my computer. It is 5 pages. It's too much. But when you're with a group of sophisticated senior leaders, department heads on an aircraft carrier or warfare commanders in a strike group, you expect them to be able to read something like that and digest it and understand it. And then you can feed it back to them and reinforce it as time goes on. So that was, it's really, I can't tell you how cool it is that you brought that up. One other thing that was really cool that somebody brought up to me one time when I was giving a talk is on Enterprise, when we were doing the first strikes against Afghanistan after 9/11, the first night. I wanted to say something to the crew, and this is about communications. I wanted to say something to the crew on this big, loudspeaker system that goes through the whole ship that would be meaningful to them. And I was searching for how I would find the hook for this particular communication. And it fell right into my lap because the newspaper in Virginia Beach put out an article that had the silhouettes of all of the ships that were off the coast of Pakistan ready to do these strikes. And it just so happens that the silhouette of USS Enterprise was not my USS Enterprise. It was the World War II Enterprise that Jack flew off of. And I had met Jack, right, at this point. So I was like, pardon my French, holy shit, this is good. And it occurred to me that the last time our nation's soil had been attacked by an outside foe was Pearl Harbor. And we were on our way home, and when the World War II Enterprise, it was on its way home during Pearl Harbor. What a magnificent thing to start a talk to your crew. The last time the United States soil was attacked, a different USS Enterprise was on its way home. And now when we were on our way home, because we were on our way home when 9/11 happened, the same thing happened to us. And then you can go from there. And it's a great speech. And I had a senior chief petty officer come up to me, and he goes, I've kept that speech. Talk about resonating as a leader. It was pretty cool. Pretty cool.
The one thing that none of us like to do if we're running a big corporation or the Navy or taking care of patients in the operating room, we don't want to make mistakes. And when Andy and I went out and visited you on the Roosevelt, what impressed me so much was that everybody on the team communicated so directly and so clearly, and you mentioned this. And I talked to our people about this too, but we need to be more formal and we need to be more clear-cut when we do this thing, because we all do dangerous things and we've got to communicate very clearly and safely. So I appreciate you bringing that up.